British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is traveling across the Atlantic to meet with President Trump. And tomorrow's meeting comes, as you may recall, after a visit earlier this week from French President Emmanuel Macron. And no doubt Europe is still, at least in some degree, reeling from President Trump's return to the White House. And specifically, what does President Trump's return potentially mean for Europe? What does it mean for things like Ukraine and Russia's war? Well, joining me now from across the Atlantic to discuss this is Peter McIlvenna. He's the co-founder of Hearts of Oak, a freedom of speech alliance, and he also works in the office of the UK's House of Lords. Peter, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you.
Thanks, Jody. Thanks for having me on, and apologies we've sent our Prime Minister your way.
Hey, listen, we welcome him with open arms. So, but listen, no doubt these are interesting days we're all living in. I wanted to get your opinion of all this. It's been a little over a month now since President Trump returned to the White House. From your perspective, how have you seen your fellow countrymen and other Europeans react to President Trump's second term so far?
Well, it's caused ructions, I think is the term I'm using, across Europe. We saw the German election, obviously, over the weekend, and Alternative for Deutschland doubling their share in the election. And that was the Elon Musk effect, talking about the elections there. I saw Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, speak. I think she was speaking at CPAC, and saying she stood shoulder to shoulder with President Trump. We are seeing an alignment that actually 4 years ago, if Trump had taken office in 2021, the landscape would have been very different. It would have been an antagonistic Europe that would have been a barrier to cooperation and trade between Europe and the US. 2025 is so different. We've seen the rise of the populist right all across Europe in terms of government or in terms of second place. AfD took second place, and we've seen so many of those all across Europe. And that means there is cooperation to be had, there's a relationship to be had, and the European Union is in a time of existential crisis. And into that drops President Trump. And it is exciting to watch, and it's exciting to see a lot of politicians reaching out now, where I think 4 years ago they wouldn't. And I'm hoping that provides some positive effect in the UK, because, of course, we don't really have a populist rise in the UK, despite the fact that Nigel Farage has done exceptionally well and is polling well. We are 4.5 years off a general election. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, Macron, the French president, was over visiting President Trump just days ago. And now there's Keir Starmer's chance. And they're vying to reshape Europe. And they're vying to be the strong men of Europe. Macron being very weak. Keir Starmer being much stronger with a huge majority. Germany being very weak with chaos there ensuing really after the election. So Keir Starmer possibly could be the winner in terms of electoral confusion across Europe. But sadly doesn't stand for much, and he's never been a fan of President Trump, but he seems to be eating humble pie and seems to be speaking Trump's praises, which is positive. But of course, it'll be exciting to watch the press conference between them both.
Very, very interesting take on all of that. And yeah, there's plenty of humble pie being served all across the globe right now. So Keir Starmer is meeting with President Trump tomorrow. What do you anticipate that discussion will consist of? What do you think they're going to be talking about?
Well, it'll be about trade. It'll be about defense. I think those will be two of the key conversations. Many European politicians are trying to cozy up to President Trump and trying to delete past tweets. Let's put it that way. Keir Starmer is one of those, as is David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary, who still has full Trump derangement syndrome. So they're rowing back on that. The conversation is going to be about trade. Obviously, President Trump has talked about trade tariffs against the EU, and rightly so, because the EU is one of the most protectionist blocs in the world. How they treat countries in Asia and Africa is horrendous. And that's very much behind the wall of the EU. President Trump sees the unfairness of that and how the US is treated with the EU. And he's talked about big trade tariffs on the EU. The UK said there's a relationship to be had. We have a balance of trade. So there isn't a trade deficit with the UK as there is in Europe. So I think there's conversation to be had, and that's a positive conversation. The UK surprisingly still being the fifth largest economy in the world. I know we vie with France. That changes often with France. But there seems to be synergy with the UK and the US. And the other one is defence. And shockingly, the UK came out, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and announced that a far-left government is going to cut aid spending and increase defence spending. So the UK has talked about increasing aid spending to 0.7%. They're now saying that could drop back to 0.5 or 0.3%, and the savings could be put into defence. We just about hit the 2%, but Keir Starmer was talking about 2.5% of GDP for defence spending in 3 years, and in 6 years moving that up to 6%. And the UK being one of the big spenders on defence. I don't know what we have to show for that because we've been fully on the DEI wagon. But at the moment, we have about £52 billion, $70 billion is our defence spending, which I know is a drop in the ocean for you over in the US. But it is the largest defence spending in Europe. And that's why there is interesting conversation. It was shock in the House of Commons today, whenever this was being discussed, and Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the so-called Conservative Party, tried to actually hold Keir Starmer's feet to the fire and mock him for this, and he seemed to get past those attacks fairly easily. But it's shocking we have a far-left government who wants to increase defence spending and cut aid. And that is because of the Trump effect. There's no other reason that could happen but because of President Trump. So that's one of the huge positives that you saw with Colombia. President Trump announces what happens and they back down. We've seen it all across, that when President Trump wants a deal, he will get a deal. And I think he's found this deal with the UK on defence spending. And there's another conversation with the Chagos Islands. That's also going to be another huge conversation because the Chagos Islands are vital to US interests. The US have an airbase there. It's a UK island, but it looks like we're going to hand it back to Mauritius and pay them 12, 15 billion pounds, up to $20 billion for the privilege of leasing it back. Imagine you own something, you hand it back, and then you say, by the way, I'm going to pay you 20 billion to borrow it back for 99 years. That's the deal the UK have done. President Trump is certainly not happy at that deal. That was pushed through under the Biden administration. And I think that's also going to be a topic of conversation and contention. And I'm really hoping that Trump says, those are too important for US and UK interests in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and that agreement has to be torn up. But that is going to be defence, which covers the Chagos Islands, and also trade. I think those are going to be the two main talking points.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And another aspect of the whole defense discussion, I would think, and I'd like your take on this, is Ukraine. You've got America's policies that are impacting Europe right now. What do you anticipate is going to end up happening with Ukraine?
Well, I've seen the conversations with you guys and the minerals. That's a fascinating. Trump always brings a new angle to things. We've seen it in terms of Gaza. Right. We see it in terms of what's happening in Ukraine, Russia. He brings something new to the table, and Europe are saying, oh, suddenly Trump has changed the agenda. Let's talk peace. And Trump says, you've had 3 years to talk peace. Why have you not done this? And it takes someone of the stature and the nature of President Trump to step into that and actually change the conversation. And he is a master at that. So that is going to be a key part of the conversation. The UK have been the biggest allies with Ukraine in terms of defense spending. We've sent just short of $20 billion over there, which again is much less to the money you've sent there. If any of that did get to Zelensky, that's another part of the conversation. And the EU has sent large amounts over to Ukraine. And obviously, with President Trump starting that conversation with Russia in Saudi Arabia, Europe panicked. They pulled together a conference of their own and suddenly started making noises about maybe peace might be better instead of having the butchering that we are now having on that front line. So I think the UK will have to be pulled into line. Look, we had an awful situation back when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. He was the biggest advocate of the war continuing, and there are a lot of talk that he torpedoed any conversational peace with Zelensky, with the European Union approval. So he seemed to be the one that was sent in to scupper that. So 3 years later, President Trump comes in, wants peace, and Europe will have to come to the negotiating table. And it seems as though President Trump will say, either you have peace on my terms, or actually you're going to have peace anyway, because the US are going to cut off funding. And if the US do not provide funding, then the war cannot continue. And is far left and woke ideologically, Europe, parts of Europe and the UK are, they see that they can't afford to keep this war going themselves. And therefore, they will be forced into having a conversation on peace. And the US are going to benefit from that in terms of those rare earth minerals. Europe are going to benefit because we're not sending all the money over to Ukraine. And I 2-3 months ago, we had the head of the army said that the UK only had 3 to 5 days of munitions. That's how little we have. That's how much we have sent away, that we are no longer protected. So all the conversation in Europe about Russian aggression, it seems to be utter nonsense, a smokescreen, because if there was so-called Russian aggression against Europe, Europe would be arming themselves. And yet we have depleted our weaponry hugely by sending everything to Ukraine. So that story doesn't match up. Trump's going to call that out for what it is. And I think Keir Starmer is going to be forced to agree with President Trump that a peace deal will have to be done. It's going to be done on Trump's terms, and Europe will accept that. So that's where I think we're going to go. I can't imagine Keir Starmer rejecting overtures from Trump. Certainly Macron didn't 2 days ago, and I can't imagine the UK refusing any conversations or any peace deal that President Trump puts on the table.
That's what you call leverage, and it's a powerful thing, and Trump certainly knows how to use it. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to get your reaction to this clip of investment firm CEO James Fishbach sharing his concerns about Britain's clampdown on free speech and what that might mean for the future investment in the UK.
Good luck going outside of an abortion clinic in the United Kingdom and praying. It's really sad and really frustrating that people silently praying in front of an abortion clinic would be arrested and charged for doing absolutely nothing wrong. We have a choice to make. Do we want to invest the next dollar we have in the United States or in the United Kingdom? I have great respect for the people of the United Kingdom, but right here, right now, we got to be honest. It's business. It's not personal. We're going to invest our money in the United States.
Interesting comment. Real quickly, your response to that.
100% agree. It's been frightening in the UK, the clampdown on free speech, and the James talking about the prayer being made illegal outside abortion clinics. And I have one very close to me. And if I walked 30 minutes to a certain area, it would be illegal for me to pray. So this affects me where I am here in London. It affects people all over the UK. And over the weekend, there was a case of a woman being arrested in Scotland. The Scottish government have ruled out this, and they call it buffer zones or safe zones. I tell you, there is no safety for those children that are going to be killed. I don't know what they mean by safe zones, but all our governments, we have kind of devolved governments in the UK, but the central Westminster government and the devolved government in Scotland and in Wales, they are adamant that prayer cannot happen in case it stops something. And the law says anything that may hinder abortions taking place. In what part of the world, unless the UK government believe in answered prayer, that's kind of the positive side, that they are worried about Christians praying outside abortion clinics. And maybe that is a positive thing in the UK. Maybe some of our politicians are concerned that there is a God and actually he may act and may restrict it. That seems to be the only likelihood, because if you don't believe in God, why would you worry about people praying? They're not stopping anyone. They're praying silent. They're not even, this is not with a megaphone. This is not kind of the image we get in the UK of you in the US outside abortion clinics shouting. This is a very British thing, quietly inward praying. And our governments in the UK fear that. And other governments across Europe have talked about ruling this out. And the spotlight that's been put on the UK of the concern of this is only a positive thing. And I really hope that Jim's been an advisor in the Department of Government Efficiency. Maybe Elon Musk needs to keep shining a light through Doge on the UK and the restrictions that we have in place.
Thank you so much, Peter McIlvenna of Hearts of Oak. Very interesting and enlightening discussion with you. Always an honor to have you on Washington Watch. Keep the torch ablaze, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jody, and God bless.